Excuse me. Good evening and welcome to the May 8th, 2023 Planning Board meeting. Could we first please stand for the pledge? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, first, correspondence. Anything anybody wants to discuss in there?
Not that I can see.
Aaron?
No.
Anybody? No? Okay, we'll move on to the draft meeting minutes. Excuse me. Oh, I forgot my water. These are the meeting minutes for April 24th, 2023. Anybody have any corrections, comments, concerns? No?
Nope.
John?
No, I don't have anything on that, nope.
Counselor?
Nothing from me.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes from April 24th, 2023?
Motion?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Nancy.
Rich, just a question. Will there be minutes generated for the Wednesday night meeting that we had?
Yes.
All right.
Before you go on, Rich, could
Yep.
I make you aware of one thing that's
Yeah.
coming up? Tomorrow night, at the town board meeting, on the agenda is to give a temporary CO to Bird Bus, which you recall is one of the site plan approvals you did not too long ago.
Mm-hmm.
The unusual thing here is that none of the site work has even begun. So be aware of that. I don't know if you want to make any comments on it. I don't know what their intent for tomorrow is. I just know that it's on the agenda.
They applied for such a temporary CO?
I think they were originally asking for a CO. We were asked to make any comments interdepartmentally. Both my department and as I'm aware, the engineering department made a site visit. We both concluded that no site work had taken place, and we both sent notes to the building department stating that. I think in my memo, we suggested some, differing solutions, one being, a cash bond or something like that. There was no discussion at that point of TCO, and then now it's on the agenda for tomorrow night, so just making you aware of that.
So,
What do we do?
That's beyond me. I don't get it.
What, do you have any sense of what
Hold
the
him
intent
hostage.
or what the reason for their request is?
I don't know the reason for
What's the advantage or the benefit to them?
Well, I guess to occupy the building and start utilizing it. But, again, if they're going to utilize it, my thought is, if they're going to be utilizing it as a bus sales lot, they'll be using the site as well, which will even make it more difficult for them to complete the site plan. So I have always, we have always had concern of the use of TCOs, and they've been used fairly sparingly. And the example is BJ's operated under as Bob Phelan may remember, operated under a TCO for over 10 years, or even longer maybe. And it was finally, when something was happening internally, that they finally completed their conditions, one of which was, mitigation for Pine Grove Light, so on and so forth. But that went on for years and years and years. So it's always a concern that the TCOs go on and on and on for quite a long time, and it's not always the best situation. The difference with BJ's is they had done quite a bit to their site plan. One of the things that was not completed but was attempted was the wetland mitigation, which was an ongoing thing of trying to get it to take and be healthy, and this mitigation for the Pine Grove Light. So that's what continued that one. But they did have an operating site that was compliant, to 90% or 95%, if you want to put it that way, of the approval that you did, so.
So what conditions are,
What company was that?
what remains undone that our approval required them to do, or requires them to do?
Well, there was landscaping, so there's no landscaping. There was a median that was going to be constructed with a curb, which was going to become a landscape median with a fence and some shrubs to screen the storage area for the buses. And then the parking in the front was supposed to, be modified mostly by striping, so it's really not a heavy lift.
Okay.
It's not a heavy lift at all. And, that's pretty much the extent of it, so.
And did you recommended a bond for those items?
Liaison is right
I
there. Why don't
recommended a bond.
Give us his opinion.
I'm sorry?
I said the town board is here. Why don't he give us his opinion?
Sergio.
Because I think we were being asked first, that's all. I just want to, so you recommended to the town board that they put a bond in for those improvements to the site?
Yeah, that's
My,
get to
my
be done.
correspondence was to the building department, and I recommended that, at least that as a measure, if they felt they needed to get a CO, to bond the site work. And I think, as I recall, I recommended in the note to, to immediately begin the site work, because like I said, it's not a heck of a lot. It shouldn't be a heavy lift, and it shouldn't be too disruptive to any plans that they have, really, to be honest with you, to complete it.
Oh, the ball is in their court then, right?
Yeah, well, I certainly want to encourage a business to come in
course.
and open, and if it's not safety related necessarily, it's, the building's already there, they've got an operation they can move into pretty quick. I just want to make sure that things get done.
Yeah.
That's always the hope and
Well,
concern.
a bond would do it,
I think so.
of course. Nobody wants to lose
My feeling is a bond is callable on our schedule rather than a temporary CO is not necessarily callable unless we put a time limit on it.
That's right.
So I think, given past history and just my past history with knowing other temporary COs, you want to be in control of getting the result done. And I think anything that gives us leverage to get that result done is what we want to do. So a bond is one thing because we can call a bond if the improvements are not executed by a certain date, or if we give them a temporary CO, it should have an extinguishing date that says if you don't have it done by a certain time.
Revoke the CO, the TCO.
You gotta take into consideration that it's unsightly, there's people looking at this place, doing business, it's not completed. They were sold a bill of goods, they're not getting, as far as they know, they're not getting what they were told was going there. And if we don't put a date on when it has to be completed, then it kind of falls on us that we're not following up.
That's good.
How hard is it to, once someone gets a TCO and pull a bond, in your experience, how difficult is that?
To,
Once a TCO is executed and someone's able to move in and start working, open up their business, and there's a bond in place, how difficult is it to call that bond or deal with the TCO?
calling bonds is always difficult, I think. I've never been involved in a call of a bond without a huge fight. TCOs are another matter. They can't occupy the building once it expires. And a temporary is just that. It's temporary and for a limited period of time. I've never seen a temporary CO that doesn't have an expiration date. They routinely get renewed. I mean, the Galleria in White Plains operated its whole existence on a temporary CO.
They're right.
Never got a permanent CO.
Well, once they occupy the building, they open business, it's difficult and undesirable to try to say, well, you can't occupy the building any longer. I don't think anybody would like to see that happen.
Has this been done in the recent past?
We often require bonds, and in this case, I think it should be a cash bond. but we often require bonds at the end when, for instance, the landscaping's not complete and it's, December. We take a cash bond and spring comes along and they finish their landscaping on the site plan, and then you release the bond. And in the meantime, they get a permanent CO. So, the leverage is they want to get the money back, so they finish the site plan.
Sergio, has the board weighed in on this at all?
I haven't, I'm not sure if we're gonna be requiring a bond, but, I am, trying to find out right now for you guys. I could bring your comments back, to the town board and be happy to discuss it with Supervisor tomorrow morning, or this afternoon, or this evening after I get out of here, and give you some more information on it.
John, to your knowledge, are the critical issues in that site are lighting, right, for the neighbors in the back, and some other, parking lot striping and landscaping can come, but from a safety and compliant with the promises made to the neighbors, are those all in line or all completed, to your knowledge?
The lighting, if you recall, the lighting poles, there was some foundations for light poles there. They're not being utilized again, so there won't be any of those. I think there will be some wall packs, and I think they're shielded, as I recall. So I think that will be compliant. So in terms of lighting, I think it's correct. The operation of the site, if you recall, there is a, like a one-way in situation with some diagonal parking. So that is something to pay attention to, how the site, you operate managing ingress and egress, just in terms of vehicle, movements. So that's a slight concern, I think. But the, the median and the landscaping with the fence and so forth, that's not a safety issue, obviously.
All right, so do you want to have the department work up a memo, maybe for tomorrow, that we can get to the board? That makes
Fine,
sense?
if you
That would help.
like me to pursue a memo.
Please give them our direction.
Yeah.
That would help.
Okay.
So you would recommend some
You're saying
security? of some
You're saying a cash bond,
Some teeth.
expiration that's not
Right.
unreasonable.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention. All right, first on the agenda, we got Home and Hearth. This is a decision statement, location 750 East Main Street. I don't see anybody here from the applicant. Oh, hey, how are you? Sorry. No problem. Come on up. I apologize.
Okay.
Have you had a chance to take a look at the resolution?
I did, yes.
Any issues, concerns?
No, it seems pretty straightforward, honestly.
Okay. Any concerns or comments from the board?
I have two comments, but I want to preface my remarks by saying they're not at all affecting anything that you need to do. Okay? As far as I'm concerned, the application is fine, and I fully intend to support it. But I want to address two underlying issues which happen to come up and has nothing to do with your application per se, but it's a procedural issue that our board has been talking about for a while, and that is the impact of resolutions like yours in general. So just keep in mind that I'm not talking about your project or any of the details regarding it, but more general
Sure, understood.
concepts that should be considered by us in all of these approving resolutions. And so I have two proposed changes or additional clauses which I think we should be implementing regularly in these approving resolutions. One is language which states that no further changes to this resolution or the plans on which it is based shall be made without further express written permission of the planning board. That's number one. And the second resolution, which I think should be included as a matter of course in our approvals, is that something to the effect that any agency to which the underlying application has been referred and which agency has not commented on that application shall be deemed to have accepted the application as presented and approved by this resolution. So I think those two clauses, additional language, should become standard,
Like part of the boilerplate.
as part of our boilerplate, and I hope that thereby we would be heading off
Yes.
some of the problems that we've been talking about.
There you go.
Yeah, I agree.
I think they're,
Okay.
I know there's not a motion, I'll
Excellent.
second that.
Excellent. All right, so that being said, we're gonna add these two changes.
Yep.
Again, doesn't affect your application at all.
No, understood, sure. Makes sense.
Yeah. Any comments, concerns, John, Jim,
no, none here.
board?
No.
All right, so with the changes as noted, do we have, first, do I have a motion to declare the board the lead agency?
Motion.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
We also have a neg deck in front of us. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And then we have a resolution approving the site plan, wetland permit, and stormwater pollution prevention plan for the Home and Hearth site plan. Changes as noted by Aaron Bach. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All the best.
Great, thank you so much.
Good luck with the
Have a
project.
good evening.
Those are really good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Really well thought out. Okay, next we have the IBM Battery Energy Storage. This is a decision statement. Location is 1101 Kitchewan Road. Come on up. How are you tonight?
Fine, you?
Good. Had the opportunity to take a look at the resolution?
Yes, I did.
Any issues?
Yep.
You good?
Yep.
Okay. And again, really want to appreciate IBM really going to bat for that neighbor and taking care of all those issues. They've always been a
Not
very
a
good.
problem. Nice,
you know,
nice people. Yeah.
Nope, it was very well appreciated, though, very much appreciated. John, anything on your end?
Well, you have a late breaker on this, and I also want to suggest a requirement that the emergency response plan be produced to the satisfaction of the board, and we can work on that subsequent to the resolution between now and the time that the site plan is signed by you. I did speak with the applicant's rep about that this afternoon, and he seemed fine with it.
Okay.
And then in this late-breaking memo, he's requesting that the neg deck, and that the neg deck does not make a limit of 1 megabyte, because as they go and shop out for these battery systems, they do change and are become available, you know, at the times that they happen to be. So they may end up having a unit that is actually a little bit larger than the 1 megabyte, 1 megawatt, excuse me, up to 1.5 megawatts. So if you would want to change that, you can. If they do change to it, they'll still have to come back to the board, but the secret will remain closed. So the suggestion is to allow it to go up to the 1.5, or not limit it to the 1 megawatt, and which is fine in my opinion.
Anything from the board on that?
No.
Objections?
No.
No objection.
Okay, so we'll start off with a motion for the town planning board to be the lead agency.
Motion.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
We also have a neg deck in front of us for the same project. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
And then we have a resolution approving a special use permit for a Tier 2 battery energy storage system at the IBM TJ Watson Research Center. I want to also note, as amended by the previous notes from Aaron Bach, and we'll add this, we'll lift the restrictions from this, as outlined in this email from today. dated May 8th.
Emergency response plan.
And also the emergency response plan.
Thank you.
Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Good luck with the
Thank
project.
you.
Okay, do I have a motion to close the regular portion of the meeting and move into the work session?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We have the Underhill Farm project. This is a discussion of the proposed project, locations 370 Underhill Avenue. How are you?
Are we just starting off with the historic tonight?
What's that?
Historic?
Yep. We're
Okay.
gonna go historic.
So Beth Selig is here to represent us. Is our consultant here?
I did not do a presentation, to prepare a presentation, as we went through that the last time I was here, so I
Yep.
thought that probably the best approach would be to answer any questions you might have.
Nope, I appreciate that. All right, so we start, go ahead.
Note that our consultant is also here, Sarah Mesha is here.
Sarah, you want to come on up and join the party? Got an extra chair somewhere, or? Oh, we got one right there, too. Thank you, sir. How are you tonight?
Good, how are you?
Good to see you both again.
Just before we get into the meat of this discussion, is it my understanding that there is yet to be a revised, expanded EAF coming to us, or did we get that? Is it in final form, or what? What's the,
You will receive that tomorrow.
we see that tomorrow, okay.
So as we start to move forward, I think we've had this historic discussion a few times now. Again, I really appreciate the last meeting you both attended. I thought it was very productive. I think everybody kind of got a feel for where we're headed. But at this meeting, I think we have to talk candidly of what we think our approach is going to be moving forward. So we have our consultant, the applicant's consultant, and I think when we left the last time, everybody was kind of on the same page with everything. I think
That was my impression,
right.
that,
Before you left, I think all the comments and concerns that you guys had were said that were going to be addressed.
that was, there with the one exception of being the trenching behind the house, because of the fact that the septic's back there, and we wouldn't want to do any sort of deep trenching and rip up the existing septic.
And most likely when
And
the
it's already-
septic was put in,
It
Everything
disturbed
was
everything.
damaged,
There's
yeah.
also some propane tanks and other utilities buried back there as well.
which makes perfect sense.
It'd be nice to see the map once it's finished. Once you finish map, you were gonna map out and put the locations that were disturbed.
I can do that, sure. I have not done that.
So I think one of the things I heard at the last meeting was that the real gem here was the main structure, and that was being preserved. And then part of that was the look and feel of the approach as you look at the
Right.
development. And the fact that the pond and the surrounding areas were gonna be pretty much kept the same. I think I also heard that there should be some kind of documentation
Yes,
about, the history of the house,
yes.
kind of going around that area, so that as people enjoy the scenic pond, they also learn about the history. And if I misspeak, please correct me, but that would be part of the mitigation for the,
Correct. There's a structured documentation package that's a standard New York State requirement, and that would include, photographs, a historical narrative, and that would be done over the entire property, all the buildings, including the mansion, prior to any work being done. So we are documenting it as it exists today. In addition to the photos, we'll try and see what we can track down in terms of original site plans, or original floor plans of buildings. We'll also develop this very comprehensive narrative, and that whole package will come together. There will also be an exhibit, one of those lovely signs that you see when you go to the historic mansions that tell you when it was built and who the important people are, and that'll be placed in a publicly accessible spot, so that visitors to the property will see it and will have an understanding of where they are and the history of the place.
okay. And I think I also took away from that because there was some talk about possibly this being part of or the family being part of or the property being part of the Underground Railroad. And I think the message I got from, I think, your partner was that's a hands-off.
Not so much hands-off, it's just a very difficult. It's a very,
Oh.
Here.
sorry. It's not that it's hands-off, it's just a very difficult thing to actually prove. So it would be very, very difficult to prove that that site is the location for that. So we usually take a step back with that, and that's, I believe, what Cece was trying to
The,
I think she was also saying that if you do take that step, you have to really make sure.
Oh, yes.
Because you can get yourself in trouble either
Exactly.
way.
If you claim something that does not pan out,
Right.
yeah,
So
that's-
we certainly want
That's
to,
not a, that's not a good sign.
For some background, there are sites in New York State. There's an old hotel out at Niagara Falls that is definitely a spot on the Underground Railroad that folks went through as they crossed over the border into Canada. And they have ledgers, they have primary documentation of a number of people who went crossed and who were the folks ferrying and when those boats had to leave. And if you didn't make the boat, you could. So there's some true documentation about those events. And in order to make the statement that a site is associated with the Underground Railroad, you need that primary documentation. You can't just do it by a name association. It's not.
right, and we certainly don't want to get the town in trouble. There is some talk about getting Sergio in trouble, be locked up, but we don't want to do that here right now.
Well, you never know, you may come up with some documentation in the future, but as of right now, it would be not a positive thing.
Okay, and I know the plans have changed a little bit since we talked last. The building in the back was, I think, shrunk a little bit. There's a wall now that's going to be built behind the two tunnels, so those are preserved. I think there was some softening to the front that was done.
There was some moving of parking spaces.
Right. But past that, I think also with the other structures on the property, that there was some talk about them being kind of offered up for the town, if not the town, the private,
Some type of public dispersal before it goes to the salvager.
and I think that at some point, as they start to get into the bones of these structures that weren't heavily renovated, from I think what John had said over the years, that would be further looked at, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, you would want to understand what the structural condition is of the buildings to really evaluate whether or not you can disassemble them and reassemble them. A lot of times materials are just so far gone. So for example, the carriage house, which is the little building that's right next to the chapel on the backside of the pond, if you were to look in the cellar, all of those beams are covered in white molds. I mean, that's not something that's going to ever get moved to another site for a whole host of reasons. So salvaging the architectural details is a standard step in most mitigation measures, but offering to relocate buildings, having folks disassemble buildings and relocate them somewhere else is certainly something that happens.
Yeah, and I think all of us have been on site multiple times, and the last time we were on site, we really got into the weeds in the buildings, and we got a hard look at them, and these buildings, a lot of them are in,
Well past their prime.
yeah, poor condition. It's like the structure on Route 6, or the East Main Street up near me. I mean, the things, it's too bad. But again, though, I think the big plus here was the save of the main building.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
At this point, I think the two consultants are, should I say, eye to eye on is there an agreement here for the most part?
For the most part,
Okay, is there anything we're missing on our end?
no, I mean, just as long as all in the letter I received, everything gets covered.
So all of that documentation, we did complete the amended report, and has that been sent to the town? Have they received, the completed amended report as they suggested, and we'll discuss, I'll put together that field map showing where that disturbance is behind the back of the house with the septic, so that'll be an update. But other than that, I don't believe we had any other areas where we disagreed. Because all of the documentation, all of those other suggestions about research and history, that all goes into that structure documentation package that's part of the LOR. That's the mitigation measure.
Okay, so do the members of the board have any concerns, questions about the mitigation or the historic end of this? As we've heard from,
I just had a question. There's been comments, and I think in some of the letters to the editor, about the reuse of the older buildings that are not going to be kept on the site. And I am doubtful that it's possible to take an older building like that to reuse it someplace off-site without meeting building codes. You could possibly use the materials,
Correct.
but I'm not aware of anything in any code that would allow you to reconstruct a building as it exists now on another site. Am I incorrect in that, or
No,
are
you-
we left with basically donating the materials?
It's donating the materials unless they wanted to, like for that little carriage house where they'd have to put a new foundation in, and they wanted to use it as a barn or a storage shed, then yes, that could be done. But any sort of building that would need to meet local building codes, you would have to do adaptive reuse work to make it meet that. And you could lose some of the integrity in the process, in addition to it being cost prohibitive. Once you've paid.
You
to
would
move-
also lose the historic benefit of having a building that meets current codes, other than the materials used to meet the code. So I'm just trying to get to the point of,
Right.
does it make sense for somebody to consider those materials if the applicant is willing to donate those materials to whoever is interested in them?
Yeah, there's all sorts of different uses for things. They could rebuild as a barn. I've seen people salvage slate tile and reuse it in hardscaping. I've seen them take brick and do wall panels and decorative patterns. There's a lot of ways it can be incorporated into other works. I know of one instance where someone salvaged a barn from Gouverneur, New York, and reconstructed it in Hyde Park and turned it into a hotel. So there are things that can be done, but they're
To my knowledge,
Site-specific.
just from the cursory looks, that when I walk through, there's some posts, there's some beams that are still of value if they can be taken out without the building collapsing around you. And there is, maybe not a value, but there is definitely a sense of that material should be saved, one way or another.
And there are a number of companies, there's actually several barn companies who
Companies,
will
yes.
salvage barns like this to then rebuild barns on estate properties, so that it still has the same look and feel, even though the materials aren't original. So that's something that gets offered. And the biggest problem with salvage is, what is the condition of the material once you start taking things apart? And then if you store it somewhere, what condition is it in when you're ready to use it? So those are things that sort of get open-ended, in that salvage process.
We actually have a place here in Yorktown, White Oak Farm, and he has a mill there, and he uses reclaimed wood and all of that stuff. I know because I bought a nice old piece of wood, I forget where he told me it was from, for a fireplace mantle that a friend of mine is going to design for us. So he would be a possible outlet right here in town.
Is it possible to leave this discussion with a determination of what's going to happen to those materials? Are you offering it to the public? Are you offering it to a historical group? Or
we
where
will-
are you going with this now that we've kind
Based
of?
on the comments from your consultant, we will offer it to the public and the Yorktown community and the Yorktown Historical Society as a first measure. They'll get first pass on it since it's here in the community, and that gives it a higher chance of staying here in the community. If once that has happened and nothing's been taken, or there's still a lot of options for salvage, we'll reach out to other historical salvage companies and have them come through and see what they would like to take.
John, doesn't that open up, if we offer it to, let's say, the public, does that mean we're letting people go in there that may not have the experience to disassemble a building?
It's not us doing
I
it.
don't
Well,
think,
I- Not our
we're
property.
not inviting them in, I don't think.
It's
I think the
understand
applicant
that,
is-
but
It's
if
their
we're
property.
If we're offering, if it's being offered to the public, doesn't it present a whole set of new
Well-
problems?
Well, I'm glad you asked the question, because one thing that I thought we should talk about was what goes in your approval, or what documents are in your approval that will regulate some of the historical things that are required here. Some of them are required by the LOR, and we have requirements to make sure that the LOR is complied with, which has things in it such as what we've just talked about. making sure that the landscaping and the look and feel, for instance, of the site is maintained to the greatest extent practicable. So I think I'm suggesting, and I'm asking the two historic consultants here, to suggest how one might go about that, what they might suggest, that there can be an approvable part of this package that we can then, refer to during the process to make sure that things are being done properly, everything's planned, everybody who's looking at the plans understands some of these requirements, so things don't happen when no one's looking. I mean, that happens all the time. The other thing is, I would like to ask, in your experience with the execution of LORs that may have had similar requirements as you see in this one, how did those play out? What happened on site? What was necessary? What were some of the pratfalls that you may have seen? What did the governing body do? How did they approach it, if you have any experience in that regard? So I think that's kind of would be maybe helpful here. I certainly don't want to forget any of the things that we've talked about and the LOR. I think it's a big part of the process of the approval and should be part of the approval. And I think it should be clear as to what's expected and how to go about it, so.
So with state level, with the LORs that I've worked on before, when we have the salvage component, there is usually a requirement, a date requirement, that we have to submit to the state documentation of our attempts to have folks come and salvage, what they've attempted to take, and who has declined to take anything, and that has to be submitted and reviewed before demolition can occur. So the same with the structure documentation package, that has to be submitted both electronically and hard copy before any demolition can occur, but within 6 months of execution of the LOR. So there's sort of two timetables that happen there. With the salvage projects that I've worked on, there are some properties where folks will take everything, from fireplace mantles to windows to the hardwood floor to the decorative moldings, and there are other properties where folks just don't take anything. It's really, what are the companies able to take on, what are they looking for, and what is the value of the materials that they're taking out. Hardwood floors are one of the hardest things to salvage because you have to get them up in pieces that are reusable, and depending on how the floor is constructed or what happened to it after, somebody painted it or did something wacky to it, you may not be able to get it up in a manner that's salvageable. So those are, there's generally time constraints built into the LOR. And that can be something that can go into your resolution, is where you want to have updates at certain benchmarks along the way throughout the process.
Okay.
Let me ask you, when somebody comes in to salvage somebody else's property, is there a hold harmless where they have to show insurance so that the property owner is not liable for their workers and damage to the property when they're taking it out?
Yes.
They
So
could bring a bulldozer in and put tracks all over the place.
exactly. So usually there's a consultation that happens. A representative from the salvage company will come, take photographs, walk through, and then they'll decide what they want to take. When the owner is ready for that salvage to happen, which is, after the structure documentation package is done, they then invite that company to come in with all those insurances and all of that documentation in place to ensure that.
And the owner could set a time limit. I mean, if he offers it on the first, they can't take 2 months to come and get it.
No, not, I mean.
That'll hold everything up.
Right, exactly.
So who puts the time limit?
Usually it's on our side,
On the owner?
on the owner's side, yeah.
Give him 3 days and out.
You gotta keep in mind too that I'm sure the building department in town requires demolition permits before any work starts.
That was my next.
So there's gonna be a whole slew of things. And again, the building department is basically a protection agency for the construction cops, right? They make sure everything's done in order, in line, and that the inspections are. So they're there to protect the owner, also. So there's a double check, because I'm sure they're not gonna want anybody to come on property and just, as you said, going with the.
Well, no, when we said we offer it to the public, it's not.
It's not come and get it.
It's not an
It's
open
not come
door.
and get
Right.
it, you just come onto the property and pick something up. It's usually make contact with
Yeah.
us and then,
There's a plan in place.
have a written plan
Right.
of what you want to do or what you want to take.
And-
If it's just an architectural element, like maybe a bell or something like that from the top of the
Yeah, no, it's-
chapel or something like that, that's a different sort of story.
It's usually a member of the public and their contractor, so,
Yeah.
just to put it in simple terms.
But a lot of times, nobody takes it. I mean, I've worked on a project where we offered a bridge, and we offered it for a very long time, but they wouldn't take it. Nobody would take it.
I have a question for the applicant. I understand Section 5 is cultural resources, which is what you prepared and are focusing on. Is that going to be revised in any way in the final submission that we have yet to get?
I believe I did look through that and update that, but I will check with Michael tomorrow morning, to make certain
right,
that
so
before it
we-
goes to you, you have the correct information.
So there's an updated one that's coming our way.
Mhm.
Okay. Now I have a question for our consultant. So when you're going through cultural resources on this project, you're looking, obviously, we focused most of our discussion on the buildings themselves because they're out there, they're prominent, you can see them. And I understand what's going on with those. In your opinion, have we satisfactorily ruled out other resources that are not there, such as the fact that this has been used for possibility that this has been used for a Revolutionary War encampment? You didn't address that, you
That's
did
what-
address the,
Yeah.
has that satisfactorily been addressed on this
I have
record?
not read the addendum yet.
Okay.
That was submitted to the state. That has not come my way to see that it was satisfactorily addressed. I'm assuming, because I've seen it pieces and parts in
Mhm.
various letters and other formats come in, that I have not seen any direct evidence.
That has yet to
that-
come to you then?
Or I'm going to say that has contradicted anything that the
Okay.
applicant has written. I would love to see direct evidence.
And just as a reminder, Beth, in your shovel test, did you pick up any Revolutionary War artifacts?
No, and after doing the research for the property and doing the field testing, my conclusion on this is that had there been anything associated with the Revolutionary War period there, it would have most likely been lost in the process of Underhill turning the place into his very nice estate. The digging up of rock, expanding his foundation, putting those tunnels in. So there's no evidence that I've come across in the historical document record, either texts or maps, to indicate that there was something there, and we did not identify any archaeological potential for that.
And I think, and just because I would love to get more into it, but I know you're very much into the American Revolution, as I think you are. And your house dates prior, right? So, have you ever found anything on your place with that?
No,
Nothing. But there has been,
Maybe that you just don't know about that.
that's true.
I'm sure he's torn through it, but there have
Horsehair
been,
plaster, that's about it.
there have been finds in Yorktown though, right? And
Oh, yeah.
Well, sure,
specific knowledge.
There's been finds all along the long incline up to the crest of French Hill from, say, Friar's Nursery. There's been pieces of, sections of pieces of 8, I think, where they used to slice them out of a coin, believe it or not, and they used that silver for less than the whole coin. They found a lot of lead balls. So there's been a lot of artifacts that have been found around this area, yes.
former Councilwoman Bridget Crow's house, known as the Davenport House, has musket ball holes in it
Yes.
that I've seen,
So,
right? In the walls.
Yeah.
Those are recent though, aren't they?
Yeah.
so, and part of the reason I say this is Yorktown's very rich in history. And I think we have, as you said, proof positive that, certain things happen. Like, I'm from Dobbs Ferry. There's proof positive down there that things happen.
Oh, for sure.
And it sounds like in this case, unless I'm mistaken,
Not here.
we don't have that here.
I have not seen any direct evidence.
All right, that's right. Sound like
I
you
don't think she's
understand.
found any
I
direct
haven't.
evidence.
And in addition, we didn't find anything associated with the Revolutionary War, such as musket balls or buttons, but we also didn't find any other materials from that period,
No
such as
18th century materials.
teacups or bottles or anything like that. So there's, my interpretation of the data that we have is that there was no occupation there during
Okay.
that time.
Did you review the French Army maps that showed where the encampments were?
Right, yes. The one that's in French that I can't even pronounce the title.
Yes. There's two of them, one from 82
Yeah,
and
we
one from
did-
83, I think.
We did a GIS overlay, an in-house GIS overlay, to try and line up the roads and topographical features to verify that, and there was nothing in the vicinity of this property.
Right, so in other
The
words,
property was much larger.
Right, but I mean, I'm talking about this
Right.
I
specific
know, but I'm
parcel.
saying,
of
so
road,
it could have been, that could be what the misinterpretation is?
It could have happened 50
Well, we-
miles away.
Well, French Hill was probably, right? I mean,
French Hill, right, this is at the,
Not that far.
this is kind of at the toe of the slope of French Hill.
Right.
And as I recall on the maps, it's clear that there's encampments at the top of the hill. There's encampments that go what is towards Hanover Road. Basically, I think there's some encampment where the firehouse would be. In other words, at the toe of that slope that goes up Hanover. And some other places. But I think that you can make some comparisons, whether you try to do an overlay or just make some calculations on the map itself compared to some of our more modern maps. And I think my conclusion is that what is shown on those French maps does not match up with this property. So, and certainly you can see on those maps where the toe of the slope is, where this property would be. And you know, it's kind of the entrance to the Underhill Road Valley, which is the knob that begins French Hill, and the toe of the slope that begins Turkey Mountain also. And so you can locate that on the map, and there's nothing indicated there. That was my review of it. I don't know if you concurred on that
I do.
or what.
Yeah, and the other thing I just point out that when you're talking about Revolutionary War camps of that size, they would need to be near a large freshwater source. So you would have to, you know, for latrines and drinking and cooking, like you would need to have access to fresh water. And, you know, my understanding is of the property that before Underhill built the pond, that most of it was this particular parcel, not his whole holdings, but this particular parcel was that this was mostly a swamp. And I have done some research for the Revolutionary War, particularly the Saratoga campaign, and soldiers were penalized for abandoning their posts because of mosquitoes. So I don't think that they were camping right next to the swamp, but
Yeah,
that's my interpretation.
They basically appeared to me to sort of went along the Halleck's Mill Brook. And in fact, I think there's a historical account that some of the soldiers were asked to work and improve parts of the brook for one of the farmers or something, you know, and I think whatever they did is still there in the woods somewhere. I don't know where it is, but that, I do remember reading that. or
And
hearing
the
about that.
state has that location identified as an archaeological site that is in their system.
All right, so the historic part of this property was one of the big four issues that we were really looking at. At this point, we've had a back and forth. In your opinion, has the town missed anything on our end?
I don't think so,
Okay.
based on all the paperwork that I read, and I read all of it.
Okay.
I don't think you have missed anything. You know, like I said, the only thing which will come out when they talk about the buildings is a little bit more about the people who once lived there,
Right.
and who used all those buildings, which will come out in that report that they're gonna be working on.
And that happens as the process goes on, and I guess they're fact-checked and all that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you agree that all the documentation and paperwork is quite extensive, or is it light, or what?
No, it's extensive.
It's quite extensive.
I mean, the problem with it is when you're looking at cultural resources examinations, you have different levels of them. And so most people think that an archaeological testing is, you know, complete excavation of the entire, will be phase 3, a data recovery. It's not. You start with the very beginnings with the shovel test pits, then you go to larger units if you find something that requires you to move on. If you don't find anything, there's no reason to go to all 3 phases. So it's difficult to explain sometimes to the public and to everybody else why only this amount of archaeology or something like that was completed, because there was nothing found that indicated that you need to keep going and keep going. Otherwise, you're just fishing.
Are we missing anything in our record at this point that would prevent it from being, basically completing this issue now? Aside from what's going to be coming?
Aside from all of those things that we pointed out the last time, the
That are
list,
still
which is
ready to
being
come.
covered right now, with all and in the LOR.
Uh-huh.
If all those things are covered, then you will have a complete documentation.
look,
as-
right?
As far as you can go.
And none of the structures on that property are registered or listed as a historic dwelling or anything, right?
No, and I
So-
don't believe they were, other than mentioned, I don't think they were not listed as eligible for, until recently.
Right, right.
For the National Register.
And John, so
But I do think that would be the next step to, once the house is to.
The mansion.
Is to
right.
get a National Register.
So John, I do have one question related to that. So this is a piece of private property, right, privately owned. The mansion is not registered or anything. So if the owner of that property wanted to tear that house down, could they? And the reason I ask is there was a letter to the editor in the newspaper this week that put forward as a truth that any new development plan would be required to restore the house. Is that true? That any new development plan there would be required to restore that house?
Well, I'll take, I think that's a two-part question. Any redevelopment plan would not, in my view, I don't believe, require that the house be retained and redeveloped and, renovated. I don't believe that's true. As far as removing the house, I think the owner could decide to demolish the house. I think there are national landmarks that at some point or another sometimes have been removed and demolished. So
Yeah,
it's not, without any designation, I don't think that there is any strong protection for that structure.
Right, so outside of an agency permit application, a landowner can go to your building department and apply for a demo permit. What's protecting the house and the property and why we're going through this process is because there's a permit in front of a state agency in addition to your board. Now, under seeker, you have the right to make certain stipulations, as we've been talking about preserving it, about saving the history. So, but yes, generally speaking, any landowner can pull a demo permit, provide the building department with whatever documentation they want to, or that the building department requires, and then take a building down that's not on a local municipal protected list of some
And
kind.
that's where your legislative teeth would be, is if you had a local landmark law that you had, we discussed that last time.
Right.
That would be your best protection for any building that you think is important.
So Rob, was that where you were going with this? That we should seek that kind of protection on this?
I think he was responding to the article in the paper.
One there, and then to understand and appreciate that the reason the house is gonna remain standing is because the applicant is weaving it into their development plan.
Yes,
And that's
once that's done, I thought maybe you were thinking, or maybe we should be thinking about a way to make that, more permanent.
Yeah, and I don't know what
I don't either.
again, usually the homeowner, right, or the property owner is the one that applies for those kind of
That's right.
listings or registration.
They
Yeah.
can't do it without the property owner's permission.
That's not true, sorry. It's not true. You can, as a matter of fact, Tarrytown, New York, 2 years ago, declared a property against the property owner's wishes as a Revolutionary War site, and they protected the building.
That's confiscation. How
But-
can you
but
do that?
Oh, well, wait,
But I think the
is-
difference is their local
Landmark
law
law.
allows
Well, they had
that.
a law existing.
We have a law existing.
We
in
don't have a
Vermont.
law existing
There's
here
a
now.
law
No, well,
existing in
we
Vermont.
do. We do have a landmarking
you have a
law,
landmarks law.
but it does require owner consent.
So yours does.
Which is
but-
different than
Right,
what
my,
she's talking
my
about.
question is, I don't know if we can impose it, but can it be part of the discussion that as something to think about in going through this approval, yes, the property owner will offer the property for
I think
landmark
that's,
status.
I think that's clearly the purview of the town board to pass legislation that would put that in place. As we sit here tonight, we don't have that legislation that we can rely on. And if it weren't for the applicant's position, he could have torn the building down day one of his ownership.
With
And
a-
he need
But I see
not.
what
He
Aaron's
needs a
saying.
demolition
That's
permit.
not quite,
I
that's
didn't
not
say,
quite-
I didn't say
Yeah.
without a permit.
Yeah.
I
Not
said
quite
he
what
had the
I'm-
right to do it.
But that's not quite what I'm saying. I recognize the fact that our situation right now is entirely voluntary on the
Right.
part of the landowner. So I'm saying, as part of this process, might the landowner consider voluntarily saying to us, yes, as part of the approval, we'll put a landmark application in on, and protect the building that
You
way?
mean after it's renovated?
Whenever.
Well, I think the
don't-
challenge
I
with
haven't
that,
thought that.
this is, and again, the experts are here, I think the challenge with that building in particular is that it is a hodgepodge of
Projects can be
design.
on a national
materials.
register. Racetracks can be on a national register, so.
I mean, it could be,
you
but
know.
I mean, there's, you know, there's vinyl replacement windows that replaced
Friars
old rotted
Nursery is a
windows.
landmark in Yorktown. It looks nothing like it used to.
Yeah, it depends on whether what type of landmark you're doing. It's not just, you're not just landmarking it for, you know, it was built at this date and it's static for that date. No, you're landmarking it for its importance to the village over time.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
I'm
So you're
just-
not, this is all.
I don't even think
conjecture.
that it's Yorktown has something called Houses of Historic Distinction. I have the honor of living in one.
You-
And it was voluntary, but I don't even think this mansion is one of those. So it's.
It was listed, but not listed as eligible, I believe.
Well, I
Let's
think,
hear what Mark has to say.
God, do you want to speak to this?
I just want to make one comment to the comment. I think I think the beauty of this plan so far has been the voluntary nature of the preservation. If we get into mandating for example, if it's required that we have to submit an application, now you're running into issues with the so-called certificate of appropriateness for any future changes that might occur to that house. Like, for example, a vinyl siding, a replacement siding that looks visually seamlessly, but maybe not be eligible for that building material to be used, or certain windows. So I think without the enabling legislation that lays out, like, for example, the city of Yonkers has a very, I would say draconian, but they can also apply without the owner's consent. And there's a very detailed, how would I describe it? Well, the code lays out in great articulation what the certificate of appropriateness would require. And I think here, without that, we would run into some unforeseen problems down the road related to
Do
the
you
house.
think it could be worked out? Do you think we could be done on it? Look, you've emphasized time and again throughout this process the importance of the building and maintaining the building, and I'm saying, how can we secure that?
I think at the planning
That the
board
building is
conditional,
maintained?
the planning board, I'm sorry to cut you off there.
Go ahead.
Planning board approval resolution, certain conditions can be weaved into your resolution. And I think that provides, forgive me, Joe, I don't want to step on your toes, I think that would provide adequate protection, or I should say, adequate enforceability. But what I'm reluctant to walk down the path is a statewide or a national application that may have some unforeseen
Okay,
consequences.
I understand that. I think, I don't want to get hung up on how we get there,
Yeah.
but that we get somewhere, that this building, as you've been proposing all along, is preserved and just won't be knocked down at some point in the future, because that'll, you know, really change the character of what we're doing here.
I mean, if you walk down, if you think about it, really, that would be, we would trigger an amended site plan if we had to come back in, let's say we want, you know,
That may be sufficient.
right, so I think.
I just want to put that idea out there to make sure that we're aware.
I think keeping it here at your local level,
I have no problem doing that.
And to the initial question of
Thank
if it's a new development, meaning the Unicorn project doesn't happen, or 20 years from now, somebody wants to make changes, that's likely going to trigger the state permit review again, as well as your review. So I think it's, given the size of that property and given the scale, I think it's
You'll be here in 20 years, right?
probably going to be challenging for someone to just pull a demo permit and knock it down without any town
Then it'll be
oversight.
demolition by neglect.
So,
That's happened too often.
We don't want to have that.
yeah, I think,
Okay.
I think part
His
of,
house.
Okay,
I have no,
okay.
I think part of this board's
I wasn't
concern
pushing my
is,
head, that's all.
is
No,
in
please
the,
ask.
the general public, and you read like the DeVito project down the street, there was an old home. It's gone. There was the Best Plumbing, there was an old home there with historic, it's gone. Yorktown High School, they had an old structure there, it's gone. There was one across the street from your house
Yeah.
that was approved for a subdivision or accessory structure to fix the old home. It was over time,
oh, the
now,
Bernstein now.
yeah, it's gone.
Neglected,
Sure.
yeah.
So I think part of what you're hearing here is kind of the backlash from the public you know, it's always, well, the planning board let this happen, but, and, you know, as a former building inspector, you know, and I was in Nordcastle, very historic area, and people come in and they take out permits, and there's not a God-given thing you could do to stop that. So I just want to pull it back real quick. So outside of the landmark and the discussion there, it sounds like, from what I hear here and from the board's perspective, that at least from the consultants back and forth, and without further, you have to do some further review. There's certainly a lot more work to be done. But out of our 4 real big issues, the historic integrity of the property, the traffic issues, the density and the environmental issues, I mean, are we, at this point, satisfied that the historic issue has been addressed?
I think it's been addressed, put it to sleep, right?
I,
We're there,
I mean, we
except
can't-
for
we
what
can't
they,
just-
what they're
Right.
gonna file.
Keep going on it.
I think you have a lot of data that you've collected on
Yeah.
this. Not only comments from the public, but you have the applicant's consultant, our own consultant. You've talked about it. There's plenty of things that you've dealt with. So I think in terms of what you've collected, I would say you're complete, for
So we-
sure.
All right.
You know, I still have, you know, some questions as we go forward on the LOR and how to execute that and things like that. I think that, you know, we talked a little bit about the historic display. I think there's something there to talk about even further. You know, since the public will be able to come to the property, that it's a really good opportunity to put in their face and at their fingertips some of the history. So when you come there, you understand what may have been here before, you know, things like that. So a lot of discussions, you know, that are coming up on the
I'm
back
sure
end.
there's still a lot to come, like
Yeah.
our board member who happens to be an architect, I know has talked about to what level does the home need to be, you know, what purview is it? So I think there's a lot of things that'll come down the pike. I'm sure there's gonna be issues with signage. I know we haven't even really dove into the landscaping yet, but it sounds like, at least from what I'm hearing, we've checked off this box. Would that be appropriate?
Agreed.
I believe you
Check
have.
mark.
In terms of having enough information to make a
Yeah.
determination, I think you have enough information.
I would agree, just that we haven't talked about the specifics of how the main building, the mansion is gonna be improved, but I think outside of that, I mean, that's details as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, the bigger picture still.
Exactly, the bigger picture we've addressed, in my point of view. But the building itself, I think there's room for it still to be discussed.
Okay.
And you agree?
When I read that, I'll be happy.
All right. So,
Yes, I've compiled all of that information that came to you in various memos at various different times into one comprehensive
Okay.
document, so it's all
That'll be
perfect.
helpful.
so I'm sure that there's gonna be further review on that, but I think at this point, at least from our perspective, I think, and I wanna thank you both very much, and the board, for allowing us to hire the consultant, because if not, John would have probably been out doing his own test bits, I'm sure.
He would've had the pickaxe.
It's always good to get a
Shovel.
perspective from our own perspective, from somebody that's,
Yeah.
you know, coming from the town side. And I think they've done a thorough job. I think you've done a fantastic job, and
Thank
and I appreciate both of your comments and all the information you've provided us. It's actually been very educational, you know.
Good. Obviously, this is a topic we get very excited about. We like
Yeah.
talking about it, so
I'm waiting for
nice to
someone
come
to
talk about it.
give John a job offer at some point.
Well, I've been trying to talk really intelligently about it, so, but I
I
haven't
know,
gotten one
you've
yet.
been selling yourself.
Just a second, on behalf of the town board, John's not going anywhere.
No, I wouldn't put your last bet on that.
He'll be a historic.
So really,
Yeah,
If John, if there's any more questions, anything comes up,
if anything
I'm happy
comes
to
up,
come
I'm
back.
sure they'll be back and forth, but thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Counselor.
Are you gonna be involved throughout the whole dismantling of some of these buildings and the salvaging aspect?
to the extent of making certain that the stipulations outlined in the LOR, particularly as they pertain to the State Historic Preservation Office, are being met, absolutely.
And how about the site plan approval conditions?
Generally, that's not something that falls in my pocket. I'm usually coordinate with the State Historic Preservation Office and then do this particular piece of seeker.
Yeah. That's a good question, and one of my things about the LOR, and I don't mean to belabor this point here, is the landscaping plan and so forth will speak to the, the feel of the property that we're supposed to try to protect. So I think there's a fairly deep discussion there, and there's certainly some things to be aware of during the construction. So I think that should be talked about in terms of what happens in the resolution and the approval, how we go about that stuff.
I think the landscaping, and I think we've been preaching this for most of the projects we see, that's like the icing on the cake. And, especially when you have a historic structure, they didn't have, well, maybe not around here, it's not Washington's house or Jefferson. I don't think they had that kind of variety. So I think whoever does that work, it's going to be very important, and there's got to be a lot of not just for this end, it also deals with the environmental end, right?
Yeah.
Because the mitigations for the trees, there's the wetland mitigation that we talked about at the last meeting. So whoever that person is, there's going to be a lot of look at that. And at some point, I think the environmental and the historic are going to have to.
Right, there is gonna be some
Overlap.
crossover.
Yeah.
Some overlap, particularly because when you start changing out, decorative species for native species to meet the environmental thing, you wanna make certain that they have a very similar visual representation so as to not lose that feel in that setting.
Yes. I think the applicant talked about tearing down Town Hall and putting that, what was that, a lake there? Was that one rendering?
That was the water supply for the Revolution.
Oh, maybe we could that's where they all hung out. That was their fresh drinking water.
It's a good picture.
It
It's a
was.
nice picture, it is, it's always
I
fun to see
have, I have
them.
one other thing. The issue was touched upon tonight about the visual impact of what's going on. Stepping back from that issue, I was wondering at some point if we could get a refresher from our attorney or John Tegeter as to the leeway we have under the existing overlay law that we're working on, in terms of what we can do and how much flexibility do we have in interpreting the statute and the impacts which may be driven by our environmental reviews.
In terms of the visual,
In terms of visual, in terms of density, in terms of locations of things and preserving aspects and stuff like that. To me, that's like an overarching concern as to how all this stuff fits together, and I was just wondering if we could get a refresher at some point as to how it fits in with what the applicant is proposing versus where we could end up, if we varied at all, I don't know. I was trying to figure that out the other day.
so your question. at
What does
least-
the overlay zone imply? Here we have an application for a certain number of units in a certain number of places. If we find under seeker that the environmental impacts of this project are dealt with and there's no adverse impacts, do we still have other factors we can bring to bear? I think I've asked this before, but I think we might want to just review the ground rules again.
This is something that I don't want to give
I'm not asking
spur
tonight.
of the moment.
I'm not asking, I'm
opinion
not
on-
requesting at all for that to be done
Okay.
now, but I think it should be part of our thinking to lay that out.
Okay.
So, thank you very much. We don't mean to keep you up here any longer, but I think, so now, as we start to vet out the other issues, the other three that we have, I know we're not talking about environmental tonight because we don't have that final report back from our people yet, our consultant. So that's still got to get worked out. I know there was some back and forth with traffic, which I think we're going to be dealing with at another meeting.
Yeah.
There was the issue with density, which sounded like from the last meeting it was in a good place. But just for the benefit of moving forward, from what everybody's seen on the board at this point, do we see, and again, environmental we really can't talk about because we haven't seen our consultant's response, but with the traffic and the density. So anything that's been glaring or a real issue that we need to start to think about, or?
Wasn't that all covered? I mean, we covered traffic a couple of times.
We did.
Covered density.
Well, we covered density at the last meeting, but now we've heard from the consultants and our consultant, the applicant's consultant and our consultant. So now we have to formulate our own opinions of, you know, what, from what we've, thank you very much, from what we've seen, are we satisfied that, for instance, with the traffic, with the work that's been proposed, and I think you guys are in front of the board tomorrow night to talk about that, are we at a place where we think that, again, we still have to hear from them one more time, but just so everybody can be prepared for that meeting, is there anything that we see that, we, you know, like we were talking about sidewalks at one meeting, traversing through the property, anything that we see that is glaring, that we need one consultant or the other to really start looking at? Is that worded well enough?
I don't see anything because the traffic consultant covered it pretty heavy. I mean, he's been before us a couple of times. How could I have any question with him? He's the educated guy.
Well, we've had professionals on both ends, right? It's
Yeah.
engineer v. engineer. And there was some back and forth in the beginning, and I think there was a meeting of the minds. But for the purpose of the mitigation of the project, do we feel like with the traffic, what was proposed, is that enough to mitigate? I mean, I have my own opinion, which I'll speak to. I think it, and I've said this from the beginning, the town board, we did not create the overlay district, the town board did. We're just given the tasks of making sure that it's complied with. So when they did that, they invited a certain amount of development. When you do that, you know, it's like putting a big carburetor or a big engine in the car and no muffler. So now we have an intersection where everybody seems to have an issue with it, rightfully so, with this study that was done and the level of service that was given. Now we've got the applicant that's come forward and is working with the town board to get the full package through for the intersection, which, from what I see and what I've learned through my years, is gonna help not just this application, but it'll help the flow of traffic for the entire downtown area. So to me, that mitigation, although there's still devil in the details, is sufficient.
That's what I just said.
But we have to vet that out with ourselves. That's part of our process now. We just can't rely on the consultants. We have to come up with our own opinions.
And I believe we've done our due diligence. We've looked into just about every aspect.
Everyone.
We've called experts.
Yep.
If we lacked anything in any one of those fields, they've all came and testified to their experience with dealing with these problems. I don't believe I could question a traffic expert not being a traffic expert. Correct me if I'm wrong. Questioning an architect or questioning a lawyer or an engineer. We can only put in what we,
Well, maybe lawyers.
I was gonna say architects, right? But now we're creating a record,
I vote for the
Low-hanging fruit,
right? And that's our goal here is now to create that record. So as we move forward, it's clear of what our opinions are. So, all right, so we've talked about the historic, we've talked about traffic. Again, environmental, we're waiting to hear back from our consultant.
Oh, is the traffic record complete?
I think they're,
Before us at
they're
this
working,
point. I
I
mean,
think
I
they're
think-
still, and they were, at the next meeting, I think we're gonna have them both here to kind of do the same thing we did with the historic folks.
Is there anything new coming in on traffic?
Nothing new. They'll come in and reiterate what they said before, but we'll do that on the 22nd if you like. Okay, and I guess the wetlands, the environmental, will be done on the 22nd.
Yeah, we're waiting to hear back from our consultant. So at some point, I'm sure our consultant will reach out to your consultant, they'll have the back and forth, and then we'll have the same kind of,
Then what we have to do is decide if the record is complete.
right,
Is there an adverse environmental impact on
Right.
the issue of traffic?
right.
And then
And the other issues too.
I'm
So-
not prepared to do that tonight.
No,
necessarily.
no.
But
I just want to
that's
vet it out.
Really, the process we're gonna do on these remaining issues, if there are adverse environmental impacts that still need to be addressed and the plan is complete, we treat it one way. If they're mitigated properly and there's no adverse environmental impact, we go on and
Right.
hopefully we do.
And we're going to get a document, or the town will tomorrow.
Yes.
So why don't we, let's get that
Yep.
and then review. I don't see any more information that we need on traffic. Right.
So do you think we need a traffic consultant again or no?
Well, we need to make
The record.
record.
So, John, for purposes of do you have anything else you want to add? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Did you have anything you wanted to add? I didn't mean to cut you off.
What else you want?
So,
If it's just those two consultants, you know, I'll have them come in on the 22nd.
I think that would be the appropriate way to go. So, for purposes of process and procedure, moving forward, John, what do you see as our next steps and the next benchmarks here for moving forward?
A little more of what you've done tonight on some of the other issues,
Right.
apparently, obviously. Once we get the completed EAF, we will refer that out to all involved and interested agencies. I think you need to give them ample time to go through it, because it's gonna be, you know, it's a big document. So you probably need to leave them, you know, 3 to 4 weeks, time to get back with comments. And during that time, you'll move through some of the things as you did tonight. Those comments, when they come back, you'll have to give some consideration to those. You know, some will be easy, you know, I don't know if any will come in that raise something that you hadn't thought of, it's always a possibility. But once at that time, you know, you should, around the time that those comments are coming back in, you should be probably, you know, having a public hearing. That may go for 2 times, you may be able to close it in one night, I don't know, it depends on what number of people will want to give public comment on. Once those things happen, I think then you'll be ready to start to formulate a decision.
All right, so we're in the second week in May. By the time we get everything out, and it's around, that's probably the first week in June, that we'd be expecting responses back from everybody. I know the public is chomping at the bit to have the public hearing, and to voice their concerns over everything that's transpired over the
Personally, I can't wait.
Rich, I just want to speak to him 1 second, right? We're not doing anything different here. We look at the same topics, regardless of the size of the subdivision or development, right? They're all the same, it's the big four that, you know, we looked at here, we look on every project,
Yep.
right? We've done extensive review, and I think great discussion, and I think somebody mentioned how educational this whole process has been, and I just hope that people are listening, that, you know, they understand that this is what this board is here to do. And, you know, there are things out in the public, whether it's in the press or what have you, that are just inaccurate, and I guess because people just aren't listening. And then, so I hope that when we get to the public hearing, it is not just a throw the same stuff at the
Right,
fan
right.
and see, you know, just because the noise factor, they think is gonna be something that's going to be effective. This has been an amazing process that we've gone through here, and we've learned a lot and hopefully educated a lot of people as well along the process. So I look forward to the public hearing, because I'm hopeful that people are gonna realize that this process works.
And, you know, when we had the public informational hearing, you know, we let everybody speak. There was no time limits. Everybody went on. We had all kinds of presentations so that we heard what everybody wanted. Now it's gone through this process, and I have to tell you, from going through the Costco or the Lowe's public hearings, where there were hundreds of people at that point, even though there were that many people, I truly believe that the people in Yorktown are very respectful. And they were, you know, there was some very good comments, and we held, you know, we didn't have 15 people getting up and talking about traffic each time. I really tried to limit that, so I think it will be a good public hearing.
We should absolutely put some kind of restraints, either by time or by subject.
Well, I think we do it by subject, not by time, because then people feel that they're been stifled. And we want this, at the end of the day, for everybody to say they've had their say. I don't know, honestly, after we finish this up, I think anything that, like you said, we've talked about everything to exhaustion. That being said, so just so we can give the public, and I know Susan's waiting for the day she can come up here and talk. What do we get it, Susan, every time I see it, I know.
You gotta have time.
No
You
one
gotta
can
have
say you
time
don't do
on
your
it.
homework.
I just
So-
want to add to what Rob was saying. I feel that the process has been heavily influenced by the public comments, not necessarily in the decisions, but certainly in identifying issues and gathering information on those issues. I recall that we did a complete outline of the public comment we got at the informational hearing, and that formed the basis of everything we've done since. So it's certainly not a situation where we're going off on our own, but, the public is welcome and continues to be welcome, and we'll have that other opportunity, at least at the next public hearing, to see what we've done and see how it may differ, or how it certainly takes these issues into consideration.
Oh, absolutely.
I just have a question. Do you think we, as a board, should address the newspaper articles that get written that I assume are part of the public record? I'm assuming, I don't know that that's accurate. But
I've probably gone too far already.
No, but we have already gotten a lot of letters, and we continue to get them every week. And some of them are so totally wrong that I don't know that we can just ignore them. I don't know if we, they're completely inaccurate. And no, I shouldn't say completely. They're completely inaccurate on certain topics. I don't know if we should, as a group these together somehow, or address them individually. But I'm uncomfortable just leaving them unanswered, because it demonstrates to this board, I think, the lack of understanding of the development process and what this board is obligated to do. We can't take any applicant and simply tell them, well, there's 17,000 square feet of vacant space in town, just tell them to go away because we don't need any more space. So Mr. Galaro, pack up your bags and go away. We can't, as a board, tell anybody to do that. So I don't know that the public has an understanding of what our obligations are when we have an application in front of us. I don't know if this is the time to address some of that or not.
I think we should probably formulate a response. I don't know that we do it right now. But I think we work with John and Robin to kind of address that, because I do think hey, listen, you watch the posts and well, we should have this in town, or we should have that in town. That's not what we do.
Right.
We receive the applications and we review them as submitted. I'm sure they would love to put a crumble cookie in the old mansion to keep my daughters happy, but
I think
When
what-
you
go ahead,
address
Mr.
people who are absolutely lying to their own purpose, you just foster them to keep going. If they get a remark out of you in response to their lies, that gives them a chance to do it again.
No, but I get your point, but I think this board, and I was on this board a long time ago, and I'm on it again, and the one thing that has always remained is that the board doesn't respond to individual comments during the process. And I admire the board for doing that. And a lot of times you want to answer something back because it is so wrong, and they assign to you individually or as a board, us as a board, what our intentions are, when we haven't taken an action that would demonstrate those actions at all. The fact that we're asking questions, I think, is our job. The fact that those questions may upset some people is their problem, not ours. We're doing our work. And I think at some point, though, at the end of this process, we've got to let the public know, and there are neighbors, and I have people come up to me individually and say, why are you doing this or that? And I said, we haven't done anything yet. We're just asking questions at this point. But why can't you just tell them this or that? You don't understand that we follow the laws that are written by other people in town. And I think this board has been very, very good at doing that over the years. So we're not writing the laws. We're using a law to guide us, in this case, an overlay district set of regulations. And Aaron's point, like, where do we go with this, because this is new for us? But the public has, and rightfully so, a less understanding of it than we do. And I don't think our understanding is 100%. So I think this is a new application of a new land development regulation that we're working through, and the public is making assumptions based on a greater lack of knowledge of that, which I understand, and I don't fault them for that. I just think it's a process. But we, I think, have a responsibility to correct some of these misunderstandings.
Well,
I don't know how we do that.
I just want to apologize to the board if bringing up that particular letter was inappropriate or whatever.
no.
So that's the first one. The second thing I'd like to say is, I'd like to think that people are not lying. I'd like to think that they are uneducated, and these inaccuracies are the result of maybe not hearing or listening or comprehending what the whole process. That's why this process has been so good. And finally, we have to recognize that people have different passions, right? So
Right.
some people are going to be all about the salamanders and the trees and everything else, and want the property to stay as it is. And our role really is to look at a project, given the scope of the project. The benefit of this project, I think, is you're going to have more people that will consume more of the goods. Those empty storefronts will fill up. Again, down the road, it'll get better. That's part of what I see. And I think I'm hopeful that this whole process has been a way for people to understand what's happening, what can happen with that property, and what will happen. So,
No, but I get your point. When I was last on the board, we didn't have meetings that were televised. You had to come to a planning board meeting to know what was going on. Or you read about it in the newspaper, and I had comments made by me that were attributed to Ed Colleen, and then they made up a person called Bob Colleen, who happened to be and it was Bob and Ed together, and somehow, but the point is that you can look, and myself included, can go back and look at our meetings and review them, and I can go back and look at this meeting and say, I didn't realize that, that somebody said this or that, or the applicant said this or that. If at this point somebody is misguided as to what's going on here, it's their own fault, because you can get the public record, you can get the minutes of the meeting, you can look on television and see what was said and what the applicant said and what the public said. You can do your homework, and if you don't do your homework, shame on you, because that's part of our democracy, is that you get involved and you go out and find out what the facts are. So for somebody to make a misstatement about the condition of the mansion and what the applicant's intentions are at this late stage in the game, if you're making the wrong comments, that's on you, because the information is there to be found.
To offer an answer to your original question, I think we should not be responding as these things come in, but we should be responding
I agree with
in
that.
general sense
Right.
to the concerns that are raised.
Right.
Okay, and I think around the time of the public hearing, when we pull it all together, when we make our findings,
Right.
we can
Outline
go
that.
through this stuff.
No, that's what I'm saying.
I
yeah.
think that's the proper way to do it.
I mean, some of these letters have provoked me to think about, did we really cover that base or not?
But that's a
And
good thing.
And I think we've done, it's a good thing, and I think we've done that, all of us have done that, I'm sure.
Sure.
And so it's provoked the inclusion of a valid comment in our review process. But I'm saying, at the end of the process, should we read these letters or comment on them
I
specifically?
don't know that we read them, and I think that lends to what you were saying. You empower people to then come at you more. I think the broad topics that have been brought up, not to simplify them, but to talk them about, in a larger context,
Yeah.
like the preserving the house or the property itself. You talk to one person, they think one, like you said, one thing, and if you look at this, right, progress with preservation. Well, I think there's some preservation on this project, and perhaps there's some of the other two. And people hear that and they'll say, I'm nuts, you're not, people take things differently. But I wouldn't want to, again, we read everything that comes to us, right?
Right.
That's what most of our.
I'm not
weekends-
suggesting we go through every single piece.
Right,
That's not
but
what
I
I'm-
think, and I would ask John or Jim, in their experience, what probably would be the best way to possibly address that, if you have any thoughts on it.
Address some of the commentary that you've received?
Yes.
I certainly would address them in the broad sense. I don't think you want to go through every one.
Oh, no.
Definitely not. But I think, and Bob can give his history on it, my experience has been that often you are here to intake those comments and use them to make your deliberations on a particular project. I don't know that it's always necessary to have to try to answer those comments back. What you're doing is you're intaking information and then using that information in order to, make your deliberations and arrive at the best project. And I think that's enough. And sometimes it's a matter of remaining true to what you're doing and not be distracted by a lot of the hyperbole that can follow along with the comments.
And I think, and correct me, attorneys, if I misspeak, but from what I've learned about the letter to the editors, is those letters don't have to be factual.
It's accurate.
Well,
And honestly, your response, I'm sorry, but, you know, anytime you're responding, I mean, you do want to address concerns of the public. But when you go to address those concerns, it should be informational, it should be matter of fact, and it should be non-confrontational. Here are the facts, here are what we're doing, and that's it. And you guys hit the nail on the head. It should be responded in a broader sense. You don't want to take on each letter that comes in for the editor, but you do want to address if there are legitimate concerns. Now, there are multiple ways you can address that, right? And the way the planning board has typically, I think, addressed it is right here at this meeting. And I think you guys do a fantastic job of it. I think there's the talent here and the experience levels of everybody and the amount of years that you guys have. Who's a planning board? Who's an architect? It's commendable to all of you. Who's a former supervisor, right? But it's
We don't
commendable.
hold that against Aaron.
But I think that's, your response should always be, if you're going to respond in the newspaper, it should be as your response is here. Matter of fact, non-confrontational, informational, and you know, in a broader sense.
You know,
And I think you guys do that.
I think we've vet everything out here. So back to the original, so we'll look to work that out. But just so,
I think Jim had a
oh, please.
First of all, I want to say what John said was very well spoken. If it was a compliment, I'd say it was almost lawyerly. But but
He's staying here.
I will say that the best way to respond to those comments is, like John said, with a broad brush, with factual findings based upon the record before you. Some of the things that we heard at the public informational hearing, we've now seen documentary evidence. Some of those comments are not accurate. We know that now. There were predictions of things that would come true that 2 sets of traffic engineers have said won't come true. That's the way you respond to those arguments. And the last thing I want to say is personal attacks should be strongly discouraged. You know, these are all, in some cases, your neighbors. These are citizens, and they're entitled to their opinion, and they should be treated with respect.
Yep, I agree.
Even if you don't agree with them, they have a right to their opinion. That said, everybody who has an opinion should be able to support that opinion. And if they can't, well, then they run the risk that nobody listens to them or people disagree with them. But people shouldn't be shouted down, people shouldn't be booed, people shouldn't be accused of having an ulterior motive. And, you know, just as the town hired the consultants it chose to hire, the applicant hired the consultants it chose to hire. And those consultants shouldn't be criticized because they're doing their job. So I think that's the way that I would like to see the board handle a response to the criticisms.
Okay. So we are at May 8th. In June, we have the meeting of the 12th and the 26th. If we did start to forecast out a public hearing, 5 weeks from now would be the 12th. Do you think that's a significant amount of time where, I mean, when I say everybody, the town, the applicant, and the public to prepare? So we put it out there, so there's kind of that.
No, I think that's certainly in the timeframe. You know, we will turn the referral out very quickly, so it will go out by mid this week. So really conceivably, I would think that you could since we've been doing some special meetings, you could actually do an earlier meeting if you wanted to. And those comments may continue to come in after the hearing, which you typically keep open for written comment.
Yeah.
And/or there's a strong possibility that this one may be adjourned to another meeting. And then even after that, have a 10-day comment. So you could go earlier. That's entirely up to you. So in that 1 week difference, I think it's fine. The 5 weeks, certainly ample.
So we have Memorial Day on the 29th. After the 12th, there's 3 weeks until the 4th of July. And I do want to make sure that everybody's had enough time to prepare.
If I could make one point.
Please, by all means.
30 days would be the 7th, okay? So if we could do the 7th or the 8th, and at that point, if you want to keep the hearing open, that's fine. But, if you could do the public hearing on the 7th or the 8th.
You saying June 7th?
Yes, or 8th.
I'd personally rather have this by itself,
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right on that.
just because I'm sure
Wednesday night.
there's
Yeah.
going to be.
It's a Wednesday or Thursday night.
Worried about filling up the evening?
Huh?
You worried about filling up the
No,
evening?
I'm sure there's going to be enough people talking that will be fine.
We may even need to do this at the sixth grade school. I mean, we don't know, these are things that,
I just remember when we had the Lowe's, there was hundreds of people. And I know people probably haven't come because they can watch on TV and there's no input from the public, but once you open that up to the public, I'm sure there's gonna be,
Want to do a special meeting that first week?
Why can't we do it?
7th?
maybe we do that and just have it standalone.
Is that
for
enough
just-
time?
That's enough
Is that
time.
enough?
7th or the 8th would be great.
Is that gonna be enough time for us?
No, it's definitely enough time, and
Seventh's no good?
And again, you'll have the opportunity to either keep it open or keep written comments. So you will have time. What I'm suggesting is that, I think you'll need as much flexibility in all of June in order to kind of get it closed up. So rather than start bleed into the July meetings, because those are when you
It's
go
in the
on
holidays.
your lighter schedule.
Yeah. Jim, you had a conflict with the 7th?
On the 7th, I have a conflict.
What'd you say, it was a Yankee game?
No, it's,
No, I'm kidding. Don't want to tell me what it is, I'm just giving you a hard time.
So can we make it the 8th?
Why don't we, might be easier to do the Tuesday, which is the 6th, I don't know if that,
Well,
Is it town
Tuesday's
board?
town board.
can they move their meeting?
pesky town board, Where was it?
Go with the 8th.
All right, so you want to try for the 8th?
Try the 8th.
Standalone meeting, just
Standalone.
this, that gives the
It's a month away.
public, the applicant,
Month
and
from
the town.
today.
Yeah,
Month away. Schedule a public hearing.
The 8th. Bingo.
all right, so we have a work cut out for us. It will be 7 o'clock.
Venue TBD.
Say again?
The venue to be determined?
Yeah, we're gonna have to, I'm sure we'll start to see the emails and letters coming in, so I guess we'll have to judge from that.
I think we should put a time restraint at 3 minutes.
I strongly feel the opposite way from that. I think you gotta, as
Well-
Jim said, kind of let people, again, this will be one night for that.
I respect your opinion, but
Yes.
I would like the board to vote on it.
That's not a problem. So we could talk about that as we get closer to that
Okay.
date, as we start to work out the details, and I have no problem. It's a democracy. What's that?
It won't be live on the 8th.
Oh.
Why not?
That's what he said, that's what he's saying. If it's not in the.
Oh, it's not in here.
Oh, if it's not here.
Okay,
All right, so it's okay.
we'll have to think about that.
We worry about that later.
All right, anything on our end to add?
That'll increase turnout.
You want to
Anything on,
No,
John?
no, I have nothing
Nothing?
further.
We're good?
Will there be an agenda of people signing up to speak, so we know?
We did
the-
that the last time too, yeah.
You did that? Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't know if that was the procedure.
Yep, no. Anything else on your end?
So you talked about landscape,
Yeah.
okay, which we've been in front of the ABAC on that.
Yep.
Do you want us to do a presentation on the 22nd with our landscape
I
architect?
think that would be helpful.
Okay.
And again, there's so many fronts on which that landscaping is
Sure.
gonna cover. The historical, the environmental, tree mitigation, so I think that's important.
So we have 3 topics that evening,
Yeah.
right?
Is he fairly local, Paul?
He's from Connecticut, but, you know, we'll get him here.
Because, you know, I think it's important to have an understanding, not the entire property, but certainly, you know, in regards to the LOR, I think we should pay some attention to that. So maybe a on-site walk or something might help, but I think if we have a staff level meeting, we can figure out how to do that.
You let us know.
Yeah.
We'll have him
Okay.
there. Thank you.
All right. Do I have a motion to close the meeting?
Motion. Second.
All those in favor? Thank you very much.